Let me say good afternoon to everyone. Let me greet Mayor Colboni. Good afternoon, Mayor Comboli. Good afternoon to all of the other speakers, of course, to Dr. Close. Very good to see you again, Dr. Close, and everyone else who's here. It's a great honor for me to be here today, and I was also very honored to be asked to write one of the key articles in the most recent edition of the Barcelona Metròpolis magazine, which I enjoyed greatly, and I have enjoyed reading the articles of everybody else who participated, so I'm really grateful for that. Now, I'm somebody who, like many people internationally, has fallen in love with Barcelona. And probably this is about my 50th visit in about 25 years. So roughly twice a year for roughly 25 years, more sometimes than others. And I think this tells us something about people who are interested in cities, are very interested in Barcelona. Barcelona, a city that exemplifies so much about a city that wants to be self-determined, a city that wants to be in charge of its own future, a city that wants to be conscious about the world. And this creates a rich environment for people like me who are fascinated by cities. Now, I'm going to provide a kind of outside-in view of Barcelona. I do not pretend to know as much about Barcelona as the local experts who are here, but sometimes an outside-in view can be very helpful. So I want to start here. I'm grateful to the New York Times for this chart that it published in May 2024. This is a very simple chart. It shows human population and time. It simply tells you what I think we all know, that for everybody who's in this room this afternoon, for the whole of your lives, two facts have been true. Fact number one, the human population has been growing. We are used to being the members of a species where our number is growing, even though our planet did not change its size. And number two, for all of that time that we have been alive, the world has been urbanizing. More people have been moving to cities, to urban regions, to metropolitan areas, and to towns that are connected to cities and regions and metropolitan areas. And I will show you a lot of data about this soon. But the reason this chart hit me in my face and made me stop and think is that we are 50 years at most, maybe a little bit less, from the end of those two facts. Human population will reach a peak sometimes before 2080, maybe in 2080, but probably sooner, as birth rates are falling. And at the same time, urbanization will reach a kind of natural peak at about 80 or 85%, either then or some years sooner. So the end of the human journey of population growth is now in sight. And there are some people in this room who will still be alive in 30 or 40 or 50 years' time when we reach the peak, and when human population begins firstly to stabilize and then to decline. For the first time in a very, very long history, apart from a few pandemics and plagues, the first time in 250,000 years, human population will plateau and then decline. As you can see, the slope of the decline is uncertain. There are multiple options for how the population declines. Climate change, global warming, as Mayor Colboni has already said, will be the key determinant of how quickly population declines or how slowly it declines. And as I will show you in a minute, also mentioned by Mayor Colboni, the issues of migration and housing will be the critical ones that determine whether this decline is chaotic or whether this decline is managed. And in this context, we talk about the future of metropolitan Barcelona. So let's just look again at our century for a minute, and to be very simple and clear. If you take 1980 as your first date, and 2080 as your final date, these two dates are useful for two reasons. 2080 is the final date at which UN population projections suggest we will reach the peak, but maybe much sooner. 1980, 100 years before, is roughly the date at which the urbanization process in the global south really began to take off because of the success of the Asian tiger economies, Taiwan, Korea, Singapore, and Hong Kong, teaching that urbanization and industrialization can be a new pathway for countries in the global south. At about the same time in 1980 in the global north, the reintroduction of a new service economy, the emergence of creative industries and the knowledge industries, as Dr. Close remembers very well, began to be re-urbanized and to create the impetus for the re-urbanization of urban populations. So in 1980, suddenly, a big acceleration of urbanization because of the synchronization of urbanization in the global south and re-urbanization in the global north. And 100 years later, the maximum date at which human population will peak. So it's an interesting century, and we are right in the middle of it. This characterizes the challenges we all face if we care about our cities. To give you the numbers very quickly, in 1980, 43% of the world's population were living in cities. In 2080, it will be roughly 81%, more or less a doubling, multiplication of 2. In 1980, 2.3 billion people were living in cities. By 2080, it could be 9.2 billion people living in cities, a multiplication of 4. In 1980, we had 275 cities of 1 million people or more. By 2080, it could be 1,600, a multiplication of 6. All of this happening in a planet that is not changing its size. And therefore, this process of population development, the demographics that Mayor Colboni spoke about, we have to manage in one planet, not in another planet, as we'll see. Okay, so for me, to understand the situation that Barcelona is in, and we'll talk a lot more about Barcelona shortly, I want to describe this very clearly, that the challenges that Barcelona faces today are the challenges of success and not the challenges of decline. The challenge of managing, digesting, metabolizing success is the key challenge facing Barcelona, in my opinion. A city that knows how to face challenges. And the deeper challenges, therefore, are challenges, it seems to me, about governance and housing and infrastructure, especially transport infrastructure that Mayor Colboni mentioned. It's about creating a big metropolis, not a small metropolis. It's about combining that openness and livability to be reconciled together and not to be traded off, as Mayor Colboni said. And the task ahead is a regional stewardship task, a metropolis kind of task, not really an urban task, it seems to me. And the social contract that underpins all of this, the agreement between the citizens and the leaders about how this works, is the thing that needs to be reworked. So let's get started. I'm going to show you a little bit more about the century very quickly. 3 regions have already completed their population peak journey and are coming down the other side. Northeast Asia, China, and Europe, you can see that they've completed their population peak. Their overall population is declining. But look at Europe to see what is happening. The process of urbanization is decoupled from the process of population decline. So we continue to grow the size of the populations of our cities, with the Barcelona Metròpolis becoming the 4th most important metropolis in the region, even at the same time as population overall declines. So population decline doesn't mean de-urbanization. Secondly, 3 regions that are about to reach their peak in the next decade. We have India, Southeast Asia, and South America. And you can see again in Southeast Asia, the urban populations continuing to grow even when the total population is declining. And then, of course, we have 4 regions where the population continues to grow to 2080 and even beyond. Sub-Saharan Africa, the Middle East, North Africa and Turkey, Oceania and North America. Much of it fueled, of course, by migration and the way forward through that. Now, when we think about all of this, and we go back to the organization that Dr. Close led with distinction for many years, UN Habitat, we see that when we look at the 8.2 billion people living in the world today, 3.4 billion are living in inadequate housing, 1.1 billion living in informal housing, 318 million people are homeless in the world today. And I salute Mayor Colboni for the Mayors for Housing initiative that he is leading with the other European city leaders, because this issue is the catalyst issue that enables us to tackle climate change. It enables us to tackle our productivity issues. It enables us to tackle our labor mobility. And it enables us to tackle the challenges we face with migration and tourism and everything else. Without solving the housing challenge, we will not be able to solve the other challenge. And Mayor Colboni is right, I think, to prioritize this. Now, we know a lot about the drivers of urbanization, and I suspect people in this room know much about it. But I want to draw your attention to some of the innovations that are happening in the world of our cities over here. If you look back here to the 1990s and the 2000s, the beginning of the metropolitan areas, the start of knowledge clusters, the arrival of student accommodation as a specialist vehicle. In the 2000 to 2010, multi-city regions, growth corridors, special zones, and you can keep reading to find here in the 2020 to 2030 decade where we are now, you see regional networks of cities, you see very important polycentric cities and regions, you see the experience zones that are emerging in cities, the 15-minute cities and the super blocks that Barcelona has invented, and of course the new housing agenda, the most important agenda of our decade, of course part of our challenge around climate. Now, it seems to me that the simple way to put all of this is as follows. The choice is not between whether our population grows and we urbanize or not. The choice is between something that could be called good urbanization or bad urbanization. And the gentleman who introduced the idea of bad urbanization to me is Dr. Close, 20 years ago in an interview when we talked about the challenge that so much of the urbanization in the world is currently bad urbanization. Urbanization that does not plan for population growth, does not have a clear transport infrastructure strategy, does not have the right kinds of public services for urban populations. And so we face in every part of the world the challenge between understanding what is good urbanization, understanding what is bad urbanization, and building the tools to create good urbanization outcomes. Now, the other big challenge that we face in a global world of urbanization, a century of cities that I described, is the risk of what we might call the convergence model. Every city becomes somehow like every other city. The same architects, the same investors, the same corporate brands, the same retailers, the same hotel chains, the same airlines. Every city becomes like every other city, and this is a risk for 2 reasons. One, because if the urban pathway is becoming less of a choice, because as it becomes a big social pattern, there are few choices to do anything else. And 2, if cities converge to become some kind of similar places, we face the risk of monotony, boring cities, with all of the mental health problems that this brings, all of the lack of differentiation, and then it becomes simply a competition for price, not a competition for quality and differentiation. So I've become very interested in the idea of the DNA of cities, and I've spent the last 5 years researching this subject and trying to identify, firstly as a metaphor, what is the DNA of a city and how can a city understand its DNA and organize around it? And we discovered that there are these 3 kinds of traits: the endowed traits, the inherited traits and the acquired traits in a city. And if you begin to discover these, you can begin to see what is the genetic code of a city, what is, as it were, its organizing ideas. We'll give some examples in a minute. We can begin to see what is the epigenetics of the city, the cultural mores, the behaviors, the way in which people in this city respond to shocks, to opportunities, to triumphs, and to disasters. How do the people behave? What do we know about them? And then thirdly, what's the customized medicine? What's the unique medicine that works for this city that wouldn't work for any other city? And how do we avoid that copying and convergence in urban policy that we know doesn't work? Now, when we do this, we end up looking a lot at what is the origin story of the city, how has it evolved, what's its narrative, what is its carrying capacity like, how is the social contract in that city, and what are some of its spatial flexibilities. So it's a very interesting way to look at cities. I want to give you some examples of how this works, but first let's just talk about the social contract. This is a European, of course, invention, as you can see, back with Hobbes and with Locke and with Rousseau and many others. The idea that in every city, part of the DNA is the unique social contract that has emerged over time and is either revoked or renegotiated and renewed every time the city goes through a period of profound change and shock, when the population grows rapidly, or when a new opportunity arises, or a new investment is made. And this has 4 dimensions usually: fairness, belonging, stewardship, voice and dignity. Very important aspects of the DNA. Europe's social contract is now under pressure for reasons that people in the room will understand. The structural pressures of housing weaknesses, big population movements for the first time in a while, and the populist politics that are arising around that, and the strong need to repair the social contract and to build a new one. Let's just talk about European cities for a minute. What is it that makes European cities distinct? What is the DNA? We are locked sometimes in a media that likes to characterize our world as a battle between the superpowers of America and China. Superpowers that have 2 or 3 leading industries and 10 big cities. Europe is not like that. Europe is a continent of 250 medium-sized and some a little bit larger cities with a network effect, a broad and diverse set of industries in which it's able to be a global leader, with strong governance, a very particular kind of social capital, a historical focus on good governance, on culture, knowledge, health, and so much more. So if you compare regions of the world only by GDP per capita, you miss what Europe is really good at, which is the institutional strength, the good governance, the well-being, the welfare system, the happiness, the satisfaction, and in the end, the longevity of its people. And so European cities have this very unusual DNA of being part of a quasi-distributed, resilient network, right? Of autonomous places that work together. A system of cities, not a citadel of cities, and much more. If you look at Ibero-American cities, which are very interesting in this regard, you of course discover some very interesting challenges about the way these cities emerged and grew, the particular social and spatial characteristics that they have, but most importantly, their inventive capacity. The high social capital in Ibero-American cities has given rise to many initiatives, whether it's the reinvention of city government, like in Mexico City, the recovery of motorways to create urban walkways, the invention of bus rapid transit, the invention of citizen budgeting. So much civic innovation has happened in Latin American cities because of this high social capital that they've been influenced by. So the DNA of cities helps us to see where our cities are going. And in Barcelona's case, as I've been a student of the city for 25 years, I've begun to become very interested in the DNA of Barcelona. What makes Barcelona Barcelona and not any other place? One way to begin is this kind of timeline that begins with the origin story of Barcelona and goes back to the Roman foundations of Barcelona and the development of this Mediterranean port. But then it goes through many stages that people in this room will understand, periods of great reinvention and expansion and urban innovation to produce many new kinds of forms and formats for the city. Each stage in Barcelona's development has leapt forward from others, breaking what were considered to be the established patterns of the city and creating something new from either something that wasn't needed or something that was nearby that wasn't being used. And so when I think about the DNA of Barcelona, I come to think of it as a series of interesting contrasts, not so much paradoxes, but obviously it's a Mediterranean and maritime city, but it's also a landlocked city that had to be inventive. It has a Catalan identity, but it's also Spanish-speaking and very international. It has had protest and resistance, as well as being a city that's been under siege many times, and that this siege mentality has produced a resilience in the population. It's a city which is modern and progressive and has defined modernism in the Iberian Peninsula very particularly, but it's also a city that is imaginative and practical in certain ways, likes to get things done. It's also a city that is literal. It's a very literary city, but it's also a city that is lateral. It's a home of surrealist art, and it's a home of different kinds of music. So it has reality and surreality in nice combinations. And as you always tell me, it's the most northerly city of the south of Europe and the most southerly city of the north of Europe at the same time. And this means that it's both open and private, it's politicized and it's civic, it's small and big. But the most important thing is that this city is a capital of soft power, and it's a land of pioneers. It's a place for people who have invented a city from scratch. As I think the Catalan expression goes, the land gave you the fruits in order to live, and the sea gave you the wealth in order to prosper. A very interesting way of understanding the Catalan mentality. So it's a city, because of these constraints, it must innovate, it does punch above its weight, it has an idea of itself that is much bigger than the physical size of the city. It's a city of big ideas, even if it's a city in a small geographical area. As the mayor said, it's restless and yearning, it's a city for intentional ventures, and so much more. So this is why Barcelona has become a city that is not just producing good innovations that people like me are interested in. It's because the innovative milieu in this city is one that produces new ideas regularly and is able to test them and be a laboratory for them. So let's move forward with our story very quickly and say we're now in a new moment where Barcelona is going to need all of these ingredients. The social contract is under stress, as Mayor Colboni said, demographics, migration, housing, many other challenges facing the city. Changes have been very fast. Since 2000, as you know, population has surged in Barcelona, while housing supply has not, and a big gap has emerged, causing many challenges and problems. And the choice, therefore, is either to have unmanaged success, which is where we may be in the metropolitan area now, or deliberate metropolitan stewardship, and I'm going to talk more about that shortly. Barcelona is not alone. Many other high quality of life, medium-sized, knowledge-intensive, high social capital European cities are facing similar challenges. Population movements within Europe are up between cities and around cities, and many new kinds of cities, as you can see here, are beginning to emerge. And the choice is then either to grow well or to grow badly. If we take Marseille, an interesting city that 30 years ago was in a similar position, perhaps to Barcelona, we can see the big cost of stalled growth in Marseille. Or Milan, that went from being the third city in Europe down to being the 20th city in Europe before it started to bounce back 5 years ago. 2 lost cycles in Milan because of a failure of metropolitan coordination. Or we can take Luxembourg, a very small city of 150,000 people with a region of 12 million people operating hugely effectively as a producer of services, of knowledge, of science and space innovation, and so much more. So an example of how this can be done well, alongside other examples such as Boston, Singapore, Vienna, and much more. Now, Mayor Colboni is leading this very important initiative of mayors for housing. And I really congratulate him because it seems to me that the European Union, as we know, has only recently begun to develop its work in housing. And European networks are very important in that regard. Mayor Colboni is the leader of this initiative, which is beginning, I think, to establish housing as the critical agenda for Europe as all of those population flows begin to change and have the opportunity to move us forward. Now, the housing affordability crisis. Let's just get into the facts very quickly. We're looking at real prices here since 2015. The EU average is up 45% in the last 11 years. The worst effective places have seen a doubling in the price of their housing, and the trend is up. If we look at households that are spending 40% or more of their income on housing, it's 10% in the average areas, but 20%, more than 20% in the worst affected, and it's rising. And then the young adults who are staying at home, which is one of the reasons for the falling birth rate, more than 50%, rising to 70% and getting much worse. This housing challenge is affecting the rate of our population growth, because of the falling birth rates, but it's also affecting family health and discipline and affecting so much more. So, the pace of change has been very rapid, as we've explained. Some of the cities, as you can see here, including Barcelona, Dublin, Stockholm, Madrid, Warsaw, and others, have had more than 30% population growth since the year 2000, but all of them are facing different kinds of challenge and decline. So, Barcelona is not alone. Barcelona needs to be a leader, but what's happening to Barcelona is not some kind of victimization of Barcelona. It's Barcelona as an example of a successful, attractive city in conditions in which no city in Europe, apart from perhaps one or two, have done well. As you can see, we mentioned Vienna and Munich here as two examples of cities that have really tried to tackle the challenge. Now, much of this comes down to the mix of housing that exists in every city. And we know that when you look at the housing market, using the market process to produce housing, there are certain kinds of strengths in that. Most European housing is delivered through the market, and mortgage finance funds tend to support about 70% of transactions, and much more that I think people in the room know. But we also know that the market has critical challenges. Slow supply response, it takes a long time. The land is not always in the right places, or it's hoarded, or it's unbuildable. The lack of infrastructure makes it very hard to build. Financialization rewards the holding of land rather than the building of land. The climate transition is a requirement but adds new costs. The market alone cannot deliver. So in all European cities, what we need is a new housing approach. And Barcelona's challenge is well understood in this room, and there's much more about it. Now, what I think we need to do are four things. The first one is to move towards explicit population strategies. Every city in Europe is facing a different combination of permanent resident population, temporary migrant and nomadic workers, international students, seasonal movers who are escaping climate challenges, people who are expats or immigrants or are working, people who are visiting for education reasons, for conferences, or coming for leisure tourism. And increasingly, the temporary population in every European city is growing in size, even as the resident population is not. And so being much more explicit about our population strategies, and I'll show you some in a moment, is really key for tackling this challenge. We've seen in Singapore, in Tokyo, in Seoul, and in Greater Sydney, in the Asia-Pacific region, much more precise strategies about the type of population, the size of population, and the mix of population that cities want to have, making this explicit for the first time. If we have that, we can match it together with housing strategies, such as in Vienna and Helsinki and Hamburg and Singapore and Hong Kong and Tokyo, where there is a clear strategy to have a mix of types and tenures of housing that will work for the population mix that they have. So aligning that population mix with that housing mix is key. And then the housing strategies that we need are to fit the population. This means a different tenure mix, the types of housing that we have, cooperative, collective, public housing, community housing, build to rent, many different kinds of housing. All cities need a much richer mix. Employer-based housing is coming back in some parts of Europe, where employers are making homes for their workers, including, of course, by universities. Senior housing is becoming an important element of this to encourage older people to move out of homes that they no longer need, that are too large, but to give them a very high quality of life at the same time. Student housing has become much more important to reduce the competition from students to residents of the city, and climate fit housing is, of course, where we want to go. So, 4 kinds of tools are now being used. The first one is to see the housing challenge not as a local challenge, but as a big metropolitan and regional challenge. And you can see here with Greater Copenhagen, with the Randstad, or the Holland Metropole, as they call it. And you can see, of course, with the Boston area and Highway 128, 3 regional approaches to building an infrastructure system and a housing system that enable a population to grow in a more effective way. And you can see the Area Metropolitana de Barcelona and the Diputación set within the context of Catalonia. You can see that the regional scale that Barcelona needs to address is much larger than the traditional scale that has been addressed to really pursue the regional imperative. The second set of tools are the land, the mixed use, the transport, and the finance. Unlocking new areas for housing, of course, involve public land portfolios, and increasingly we're seeing cities across Europe combining their public land into single portfolios. Using development finance, as they're doing now in Portugal, using the Council of Europe Development Bank and the European Investment Bank to finance cooperative housing, and then creating much more mixed use and densification around transport infrastructure as the key way of achieving some kind of mixity. The third set of tools are more the tools that we're used to, the urbanistic tools of using climate transition, density, regeneration, and retrofit to make new forms of housing that are habitable and are attractive for people. And the tools and the skills that we have in this area have brilliantly increased in the last 2 decades. And then the fourth set of tools are tools really about coalition building and leadership, creating public and private, public and public partnerships, new forms of collaboration between long-term patient capital, pension funds, insurance companies, and other patient investors, coupled with exponential technologies to really build the housing system more effectively. I suggest to you that these 4 sets of tools belong somewhere in any strategy for housing in a metropolitan area. Let's come then towards the end and say, for all cities in Europe, facing the housing challenge in the way the mayor said, I think requires us to set a new set of ambitious goals. And the ambitious goal I want to propose is that we should aim for 50% of all housing in our metropolitan areas to be non-market housing into the future. Housing that is supported and subsidized in different ways, not privately owned, but commonly used. And there are many different models, as you've already heard me say. If we're able to move towards that in all of our cities, we will recover from the challenges we faced in the 70s, the 80s, the 90s, and the 2000s, when many cities sold off their public housing, required to do so by their national governments in what I believe was a collective act of very misguided initiatives. So getting back that mixity of type and tenure is really important. 5 tests for every housing policy or decision. We should have a clear population strategy at the beginning. We should go for 50% non-market tenure. We should have a metropolitan space in which the housing is developed. We go for mixed income districts and neighborhoods at the local level, so we don't have rich and poor districts, and we align with the DNA of the city to give an authenticity and identity to what we do. Now, I come to the last part and say, I think for Barcelona, this way of thinking opens up some new opportunities. One opportunity is to think about Barcelona's future in the Iberian system of cities, where metropolitan Catalonia becomes a 10 million person region by 2070. Metropolitan Madrid is 9 million, maybe up to 10, and Lisbon grows to 3 or 3.5. To start to think of this system of cities as being a system of cities where people will move much more between them and where we can create a Barcelona which is a leader in the Iberian Peninsula. It also allows us to begin to think again about this Mediterranean arc that you've seen before, that allows us to take the advantage of the European distributed, quasi-autonomous system of cities, with each city having complementary strengths and providing housing and quality of life offers that are different one from another, where Barcelona is in the middle of this vast region, providing a really wonderful opportunity for that kind of network effect to grow. Thinking again about how that system of cities can be supported by infrastructure in order to grow the Atlantic corridor as well as the Mediterranean zone. And growing from that, a series of co-benefits of the multi-city region. Better productivity, improved growth management, better consumption of resources, influence, reach, and brand on the one hand, and then using the scale dynamics of different geographical scales, different roles for government, public and private and civic engagement, and a stronger focus on delivering the outcomes. It seems to me this is the benefit of developing a strategy for Barcelona that's about partnership with the other cities and towns within its region. So if we do this well, big issues today like tourism can become not a scapegoat, but an asset in the city. I put it to you that one of the reasons that tourism has been a challenge in the last 10 years is because of the underlying challenge in the housing market. Without the challenges that were here in the housing system, I think people would recognize that Barcelona's tourism industry is a huge asset. And it's possible to develop an idea about tourism that we might call optimum tourism, where we match the right kinds of tourists to the right kinds of places, generating the borrowed scale that's possible in connectivity, in culture, in amenities, in education, and so much more, together with a system that is well managed and well organized. So optimum tourism is possible in an environment where the housing strategy is really effective. This is my last slide. So I think, and I tried to write this very clearly in the essay, that maybe 7 things could be on the to-do list for Barcelona if we're going to face this challenge. Number 1, we need, I think, a more flexible, durable, and stronger governance at the metropolitan scale in Barcelona, and not only at the area of the Area Metropolitana de Barcelona, which is an important metropolitan core, but increasingly in wider geographies where connectivity makes it essential to have some combined governance. I think the second part of the strategy is to build the right homes. We need a revolution in building that more diverse typology and tenure and location with a strong non-market sector, aiming for 50% in the long term. We need to orchestrate visitor flows, not regulate against them, but manage them more effectively so that tourists and visitors are part of the temporary population of the city that contributes to the overall good. We must connect the wider region, and Mayor Collboni's comments about transport infrastructure are key. Just pause for a moment and ask yourselves, where are the big transport projects in Europe? Well, of course, some of them are here in Barcelona with the high-speed train and Sagrera station. But think about what's happening with the Grand Paris Express. Or think about what's happened recently in London with the Elizabeth line, the Crossrail system that's opened up the housing market. Or think about what's now happening in the Nordic capitals as they add more lines into much larger regions of influence. We need to connect the wider region. Diversifying the economy and matching that economic diversification to the spatial strategy is key. And for Barcelona, the opportunities are almost endless if we can solve the capacity constraint of housing. Decarbonizing the metropolis is about that housing and about those transport investments and making them cleaner with energy together. And then back to our social contract, to make the promise again on behalf of Barcelona, but this time at a metropolitan scale. That this is a city of big ambitions, it's a city of big appetite, it's a city that attracts people to really be themselves and to do their best and innovative work. And there's a new setting for how we do that in just the same way that Barcelona did many times before in the timeline that I showed you. So Barcelona has reinvented itself many times. I think this is an opportunity to reinvent the city again. And I think this time the geography for the reinvention is one which is the metropolis and the regional area. Thank you very much.